Square Ball Podcast.
Welcome to the show. Powered by West Yorkshire Electrical. If it's got wires in it, they'll work with it, won't they, Michael?
They will, yeah. And they'll work well with it.
Yeah?
Yeah, it'll be good work. Very good work. Certified and all that sort of stuff, yeah. Better than my work. You've seen my work, my electrical work.
EV chargers, specialist in renewable EV chargers, battery storage, solar panels, school contracting, LEDs, the full shebang, commercial work, residential work. You can get finance on both. Any more details we need to add?
No, I don't think so. Fire alarms. Did you mention fire alarms?
Fire alarms.
Did you mention CCTV?
Love both of those things, me.
All things you can
My
have.
favourites. wyelectrical.co.uk for details. Find them on socials as well. Dan here with Michael, with Phil Hay. Hello, Phil Hay.
Hello.
Leeds beat Swansea. What do you make of it? Come on, let's debrief that and we'll preview Middlesbrough in the second half.
It was cold, wasn't it?
Give us the view from the press box.
Yeah, well, one member of Her Majesty's BBC had a personal electric heater with them last night. That's how cold it was.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Rotherham was the first one of the season, but actually Swansea was different level last night. It was chilly.
Sorry, that's BBC gravy train all over.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It wouldn't be right to name Johnny Buchan, but it was he.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for not naming Johnny Buchan.
Yeah, but sensible when you think about it, given the circumstances. Good win, all in all, I thought. A grind through the first half, but I think two things that were pretty crucial last night. The first was just the difference in individual quality between Leeds and Swansea. Michael Duff, the manager, touched on it afterwards, which meant that Leeds were able to get out of a pretty flat and ordinary first half with a 2-1 lead, which I'm not totally sure they deserved. But also after half-time, I just thought the press from Leeds was far better against Swansea. Farke did reference that in the press conference afterwards about how he tried to address it at half-time because it wasn't working particularly well in the first half. The system that they had was different to what we're used to, in as much as it's not that Ampadu and Kamara or whoever else plays alongside Ampadu sit as a strict two next to each other. You do tend to find that Ampadu is the deeper of the two, and whoever else is alongside him, in this case last night, Kamara tends to push further forward. But the gap was really pronounced, and it was helping Swansea in the first half because Leeds weren't pressing as well as they could have done. But once they did, after half-time, they kept Swansea pretty quiet. I thought Swansea were quite decent last night, actually. I thought they were better than quite a few sides who've come to Elland Road. But there was, again, just difference in class, difference in ability with, Pirro for that finish, Rutter especially for that touch and that goal. That was what made the difference in the first half. And in the second half, it really was just a bit of a steamroller effect.
One of the things, actually, I noticed that I didn't mention on the match ball, but occurred to me when I was in the stadium, was that when you get teams like Swansea who try to play a little bit more and try to be more expansive, they do leave themselves open to Leeds United's pretty formidable attacking power at this level. I don't think you saw it in that mad first couple of minutes where we could have been one up and then suddenly found ourselves one down, and then thankfully we were level just a couple of minutes later. But yeah, they do, don't they? Like by being more expansive, by trying to make the pitch a bit bigger, leave bigger gaps for Leeds to play in.
Well, you remember that we were discussing this after the Plymouth game. The balance of what you're supposed to do against Leeds, particularly Elland Road. Do you come and do you sit in knowing that on the evidence so far there's quite a high likelihood that they will play through you? Or do you go at them and try and play them at their own game, as Swansea tried to more than certain other teams have, and risk, like you say, getting opened up by that front four, which has loads of pace and loads of class, loads of ability. I don't know how you find the sweet spot on that. And Michael Duff said afterwards, if we'd come here and just sat in with a 4-5-1 and done nothing, then we'd have lost the game. They lost the game anyway, but I guess from his point of view, he was thinking, if we fight fire with fire, maybe it works out for us. Maybe we get something from it. I was writing last night about Dan James, who does seem to have found himself to a certain degree, and we've finally sort of got away from this feeling that him and Leeds don't really mix, that the whole thing was just ill-fated right from the start of that loan from Swansea that never was. One of the things that Farke has done with this team, even though he's a sort of possession-based coach and likes to dominate the ball, he has set Leeds up in a way that does what to the strength of them having a lot of pace in the team, Somerville and James in particular. And I think if you're going to make anything of James, you need to be playing in a way that creates turnover ball, like that crunching challenge from Byram before James' goal, that gives him space to go into and lets him attack what are definitely inferior teams and inferior defences compared to the Premier League. And he's one of the players who Farke inherited, who who they really have made quite a lot of in comparison to what James was doing before and his influence before. But yeah, if you go through all the games at Ellen Road so far, I don't know what you would say is the kind of ideal model for playing against Leeds. How do you find the sweet spot of not committing too much but not committing too little? And actually, is there a sweet spot? Because it looks as if Leeds can cope with teams however they try to play against them.
One of the nice things from our perspective is that is a nice problem to have rather than something we have to deal with.
Catches on an off day seems to be, and also without a full strength team is when we seem to have mainly slipped up.
Yeah, we were chatting about this in the press room afterwards. I think it's become more and more apparent, isn't it, what Farke's best 11 is, or what he thinks his best 11 is. And it was pretty close last night. I would suspect that you could probably weigh up the combination in midfield. Do you go Kamara Ampadu? Do you go Ampadu Gray? Kamara Gray, which we haven't really seen. And then at right back, are you going Gray or are you going Spence? I mean, we're obviously going to talk about Luke Ayling, but again, changing the guard going on in that position, and Spence back on the bench last night. So there's a little bit of choice there, and there are, I think, odd combinations, odd permutations which could change the team and perhaps improve the team. But that lineup last night with Byron back in it and Strike had the error in the early part of the game. I was kind of saying on Twitter, it was proper last night, like a firework that had been lit when it wasn't stuck in the ground. It was just going everywhere. The disallowed goal, Swansea scoring, Pirro equalising. It was total mayhem until it settled down after about 10 minutes. But, Strike back on the left side of defence, I think that's the 11, give or take, that Farke feels most comfortable with. I think it's the 11 we'll see most often when everybody's fit, and at the moment, most people seem to be. And I think it's the 11 who'll do best for Leeds.
It has reminded me of one bonfire night when we went round to my old boss's house, and he had like a relatively small back garden. And there was, being sensible with the fireworks, put a rocket in the bucket of sand to shoot up, lit it and retreated to a safe distance, except for whatever reason, it shot out sideways and it flew back towards the house and everybody kind of panicked. And in the panic that ensued, I almost basically barged into my wife. She was holding a glass of wine. So I knocked the glass of wine, which then splashed in her face and temporarily blinded her, so she couldn't escape.
Did you leave her to get hit by the firework?
Full save yourself. Yeah. I dragged her in front of you. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, I temporarily blinded her with wine in order to make my own escape, and she was left at the mercy of the rocket. Thankfully, there were no injuries. Well, that is better than being blinded by a firework, 100%.
Well, absolutely.
But I still don't think that's necessarily much mitigation for you. I always remember somebody writing about the Ashes, and I can't remember who was bowling, but it might have been Mitchell Johnson, and them saying that his bowling was so erratic and so bad it was like dropping a garden hose when it was spraying. And it was, that's what the game was like last night, just bouncing around and chaos. Even Farke said afterwards, it was totally ridiculous.
Did he describe it as complicated? Was that the word that he used?
Ridiculous was the word he used, and it kind of was. And then it settled down into the sort of game that you wanted, and then it developed into the slog that you didn't. But again, it was very Route 1 Router's goal, but it was still a well-timed ball from Ampadu, just a little bit. He did a really poor half, I thought, but or a poor half by his standards, but just bit of quality in that ball. Router's run was great. His touch was unbelievable. It was
Paul Merson likened it to being Bergkamp-esque. He liked it.
Well, it was like ball landing on a pillow, wasn't it? It's like what Jack Harrison used to do all the time, just kind of pick these out the sky, and a little bit like what Swansea's keeper did with that horrific back pass to him in the first half, and Farke on
which
the
actually,
touchline.
That, by the way, got a little ripple of applause, didn't it?
It did,
Leeds fans were kind of like, fair play, yeah.
So it should have done. It was a bit like Farke on the touchline against Watford, wasn't it? Beautiful takedown. But I think, I was chatting to our desk about this as we were thinking about what to write, and we were saying that this is going to be a grind through December, because a lot of games and it's your performances ebb and flow. It's very difficult to play well all the time, but you are seeing that Leeds have that ability level in individual players like Rutter and others, and Pirro when he finishes like that is probably from time to time going to get them through fixtures where they don't play as well as they can. But having said that, I do think that tactically there was an impact in the second half. The press was much better. Swansea were constrained in a way that they hadn't been before the interval, and I think
did you notice, Phil, how they tweaked the press at half time? Could you tell? Because it looked like we were trying to press them quite high in the first half, and they were beating it quite easily.
Yeah.
So was it a case of standing off them a little bit in the second half?
It seemed to me that there was a bit of that. I also thought that the balance in midfield, the position in midfield, was better and made it less easy for Swansea. I think what Swansea were finding in the first half was every time they were coming up with the ball, and particularly in turnover situations, there was space around about the centre circle, because you had Ampadu quite deep, you had Kamara who was really, really advanced, almost in a 2 with Pirro rather than a 2 with Ampadu. And it meant that was where Swansea were able to set themselves. It didn't mean that they had a huge number of chances. I did think Leeds should have had a penalty in the first half for that handball, but it's neither here nor there given the result. But I think what it meant was that unlike other teams who've come to Elland Road, Swansea were able to sort of pose a lingering threat. And I thought they were okay, Swansea. I thought they were quite a good side, and I did feel that by the end of it, it was a good win for Leeds.
Yeah, they're sitting in 18th after the midweek round of results. And as we said, heading into this, it felt like, looking at the other fixtures that were played on Wednesday night, that this was one that Leeds probably had to win, because you knew that the teams around them were likely to win based on
Leicester.
What came out of that. Well, they should have done. Well, actually, do you know what? People watching, I didn't see the EFL highlights. It was on too late for me last night. But said that Sheffield Wednesday seemed to make all the running in that one and were very unlucky not to beat Leicester.
Well, following it on Twitter, which is the only way you can do it when you're at a game yourself, we had Rob Tanner there for The Athletic, and following his tweets, it was quite apparent that Leicester were kind of crawling towards the finishing line with that one. So poor result for them, but I suppose the equivalent of what Leeds had at home to Sheffield Wednesday as well. But the fact is, Farke was talking last week when we were pressing him about, the kind of scoreboard pressure and psychology of results. He said, by his estimation, 20 wins for the playoffs, 26 for automatic promotion, which tells you that if you are going to go up automatically, it's not just having to win this game and that game. You need to win a lot. You need to be winning most weeks. And they have been doing that. I think for all the disappointment of Rotherham, he was able to point to the bigger picture of how the form looked generally, and it's good. It's good. They're a very, very consistent team, Leeds.
The Ipswich and Leicester results have started to, if not turn, I know, but they're losing some points now, aren't they? Whereas at the start of the season, they were both on track for 130 points each or something. You're like, well, this can't.
It's not sustainable.
They can't keep doing this. It will not happen. Like, the points record is about 105, isn't it, or something?
Reading tweet it out every year when everybody can't get to it.
106 points, wasn't it? Yeah.
So they obviously weren't going to do it, but you do get kind of 10 games in and you're thinking, oh, God's sake, drop some points.
Yeah, grow up.
Give the rest of us a chance here. But they've started to lose some points now.
Yeah.
So
Gap is 8 to Leicester on top and 7 to Ipswich. And there's obviously the juicy prospect in the month of December of Ipswich facing Leicester and Leeds in successive fixtures, isn't there?
Indeed. But that for another day, really.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is just, if we can just keep chipping away at that gap, chip away at it, hopefully when the weather turns nice again, we're properly in touch, and it'd be lovely. I think psychologically it'd be huge if we could get a foot into the top 2. Even if we don't stay there consistently, but just getting into that top 2, I think, would show the fans and probably the players as well that we've got it within our gift to do this season.
Yeah, when the weather turns again, I can relate to Buchan bringing that electric heater, because once you get to this time of year, November, December, you know that this is it setting until March. Really, you're going to freeze it every single game.
Yeah, and there's no. This is the thing about the long winter, isn't it? There's no international break now to kind of break it up. You've got Christmas, but actually the fixtures just become thick and fast at that time, don't they? But your poor life as a journalist.
I know, isn't it hard?
Getting to go to all the games for free and getting your expenses paid for travel.
Absolutely, and having to put up with
free food, yeah.
Minorly cold conditions, yes.
Oh, no, it's a bit cold here. What am I going to do? Put on another one of my expensive jackets.
That's Popey at the BBC with his berghouses. Yeah.
But it's shaping up all right, isn't it, as we hit the winter months? I certainly feel better about how the table looks now than I did, let's say, a month or two back.
There are other things going on as well. There. I mean, we're talking about injuries before the game with Farke. He touched on it, players coming back and everything else. And it did kind of occur to me that we were talking about, with the exception of Stuart Dallas, an almost exclusively fit squad, which the last time anybody said that at Leeds must have been about 100 years ago. Certainly feels like it would have been pre-Bielsa, and it wasn't as if there were minus injuries before him either. And I mean, that was something that when Bielsa left and Marsh came in, the club were talking about actively trying to address and improve. And it didn't feel like it really happened on Marsh's watch or subsequent to him either. But my impression was, and Farke did agree with this, that they've done okay this season. They haven't been massively handicapped by them. It's not as if they haven't been missing players from time to time, but he said it's quite unusual to be going into December with so many players fit and so many players available, and that does make a difference. It does strengthen your hand. It does give you options and alternatives. It means that when you look at the bench, there is no Ayling, there is no Creswell, there is no Gelhardt, because it is hard to get onto the bench. And to go back to January, which we spoke about, I think last week, when it comes to the idea of signing players, and Farke, prior to this game, wasn't given the impression that they were going to do a huge amount in January. You do have to ask, well, how do you sign players who are actually going to get in the mix with this unless you do get injuries? And obviously you have to mitigate for that, but you don't want to end up with Thorpe Arch and surplus footballers kicking about who can't get a game.
You mentioned Luke Ayling there, Phil. Probably worth having a word about him, because he was picked out in that way that Farke's done a couple of times now. He mentioned it with Creswell earlier in the season when Creswell didn't get in the squad, and he was waxing lyrical about Luke Ayling on Wednesday about his role and the fact that he's offering loads of support to Archie Gray, to Jed Spence as well, who are both ahead of him in the pecking order for his position.
I think it's different with Ayling to Creswell, though. There are kind of two things going on here. One is that Farke is doing the right thing in a competitive sense and in a professional sense. And if we take sentiment out of it, I think from what we've seen so far, I'm not sure any of us would say that Ayling has necessarily looked like the answer at right back this season. He has looked exposed. There are fresher and younger options in the squad at right back. And I think it's right that Leeds are looking to use them. I think, if truth be told as well, it's felt for a little while now as if Farke has been looking, even in the absence of Jed Spence, has been looking for alternatives to Ayling. Has been finding alternatives to Ayling, whether it's Archie Gray or Jamie Shackleton there. And Ayling is in that position now where he's coming, towards the end of his contract. He's into his 30s. He was once right back of choice without fail, is no longer. And it, this kind of comes to everybody in the end. But the other thing that you're seeing, and I think this was very apparent in Farke's comments last night, is a reluctance on Farke's part to handle this and manage it in a way that either ostracises Ayling or humiliates him. I mean, Farke will know what this means, and it's a player who's reaching the end of this chapter in their career. And it is important to handle that properly. And I think it's particularly important with somebody like Ayling, who is well respected at the club, has done really good things for the club. I mean, at a cost of £200,000, he doesn't owe Leeds much, if anything at all. I don't think Leeds owe him anything at all. He's had the best years of his career here. But what they do owe him is that kind of dignified end to it, and that appreciates how, and treatment that appreciates how much he's contributed. I mean, I don't imagine my opinion matters to him in the slightest, but I have to say that in all the time that I've covered Leeds, I don't think there are many players who I've respected more than Ayling. I think he's been very much a captaincy figure at Leeds, and I think he's always had this ethos of wanting to better himself and to better the club. I think he's appreciated the opportunity to go as far as he has. And I always got the impression as well that it genuinely mattered to him. I can think of quite a few instances with him. One that jumps out is not so much the interview after the Forest game under Bielsa, which we've spoken about before, but the fact that around about that time, and bearing in mind as well that Ayling has a stammer, which he's spoken about, so it's not necessarily easy for him to interview in the way that other players do. But around that time, Leeds were feeling a lot of heat because the results were suddenly not great and there's a bit of pressure coming on. And he said to the media department, anytime there's media work to be done, anytime we need to speak to the press, anytime a player needs to be put up, come to me and I'll do it. I'll answer the difficult questions. I'll speak to people. I'll talk for us to save other people in the dressing room having to do it. And I think you've always got that from him. Strikes me as quite traditional in the way that he is as a sort of de facto captain. Obviously Cooper has been club captain, but Ayling has been deputy for quite a while. But also I think you remember that mad game against Barnsley that got Leeds to the threshold of promotion? A totally weird afternoon, because it was like there were times under Bielsa where tactically it didn't work or players didn't look good enough and they were beaten or they were beaten heavily. But there were virtually no occasions where the players didn't look like they knew what they were doing. And that game against Barnsley was like somebody had removed Bielsa's microchip, because the whole thing was just a mess. And no one seemed to know what the plan was. And there was never this...
That was the embodiment of beer fear, was that?
It 100% was. And bear in mind as well that Leeds were entitled 10 times over to have one of those days, right at the finishing line where everybody was just desperate to get there and to get it done. None of the players were really in the habit of chirping at Bielsa. They would never get at him on the sideline. They would never complain. They would never, argue the toss with him. They all got on with it. It was a really, really good level of authority and respect there. But I remember watching Ayling towards the end of that first half and him constantly saying to the dugout, what are we supposed to be doing here? What is the plan? This is a mess. This is a joke. And when he went off at half time, he genuinely looked like he was about to punch somebody because it was all going wrong. And rather than this attitude of, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? If we get over the line and it's, we don't play well, who really cares? I think there was this kind of body language of we're better than this and this needs to be better than it is at the moment. And I think that was there as well. That goal he scored against West Brom, that was a bad week for Leeds. That you had Nonto trying to get himself out. You had other players who were shaping to go. Didn't look like they were in good shape. He scored, and you could see again in his body language that attitude of I'm still here and I want to be here. He's been outstanding player.
It shows leadership, doesn't it? That
yeah, it
as
does.
Well, like the desire to better the club. And as soon as you said that, I scribbled down a little note on my pad just saying you can't say the same for some of the other players who've been around Ellen Road recently, where particularly with the number that were ready to jump ship. And I understand why, from a professional point of view, they want to stay in the Premier League, they want to play in the Champions League, they want to be in Europe, whatever it might be. Don't care. I'm a Leeds fan. I'm not a fan of those individual players. I'm a fan of my club. So I understand it, but equally to see people on the other side of this saying, no, I want to drag us back up by the bootstraps. It's important that this club is higher than we've allowed it to fall to.
You don't see any circumstances where Ayling leaves in January, do you?
I did ask that last night. I said to Farke, if there's a scenario where he's not only not getting the game, but he's not getting on the bench, is it feasible or viable to keep him to the end of his contract? Farke didn't really answer that in the sense that he didn't commit yes or no. He sort of fudged it slightly. And I can understand why. Ayling is a really good character who I think will do his best to stick with this. But you know how it is with players. I mean, I've written about this for tomorrow, actually, and I was referencing what went on with David Prutton when he came to the end of the line at Leeds. And the story that Prutton always tells is that he was no longer in the team, he was no longer in the matchday squad. And for one game at Ellen Road, he was asked, you remember the Jesus haircut that he used to have? Well, he'd had his haircut, it was much shorter. So he was asked if he wanted to go on at halftime onto the pitch to have a chat about his new haircut. And Prutton's attitude, he'd sort of declined with thanks. I say with thanks. I mean, he's got away with words, Prutton. So, I think
not ones that he uses when he's presenting on Sky Sports.
Doesn't
maybe.
Tend to be, no.
Yeah.
But the answer would have been a forthright no. And the penny sort of dropped with him, and he thought to himself, I'm basically a cheerleader here.
I was going to say, if you're the halftime entertainment.
I'm like a court jester. And he said that it was done with the best of intentions. It wasn't like anybody was trying to humiliate him, but he realised he had to go. So he did. And one of his frustrations, I've spoken to him about this in the past, was that whenever he went to see Simon Grayson to say, he was manager at the time, to say, why am I not on the team? Why can't I get a game? Where do you see my position? Grayson wouldn't kind of give him the clear answer of, listen, Dave, there are better players here. There are players who are more effective or suit my style more. I'm not saying I'll never use you, but you're on the fringes. And I think at that point, Prutton would rather that Grayson had just, given it to him straight. I get the impression that Farke probably has done that with Ayling. And I think, as much as Farke was joking last night about, Ayling probably wanting to kill me on the basis that he wasn't in the squad last night, I think Ayling will appreciate the fact that it is kind of clear, what's going on and what's happening. But it does have to be handled quite sensitively. And I think Farke did that last night with what he was saying. When he said, he's one of the best players the best player I've ever worked with in terms of character. Whether or not that's strictly true, it's the right noise to make, I think.
From a psychological man management point of view.
Because I'm not being funny about this, but you would like to think that this season there's going to come a point where Leeds have the chance of promotion again. And I mean, they obviously have a chance at the moment, but a serious chance where it actually is really there for the taking, where you do need to call upon the nous that's in your dressing room, potentially the players who have done it before, which Ayling has, Liam Cooper has, even Stuart Dallas, who's still around the place. And it's valuable to have them there. But I don't think Farke will be given to sentiment, and I don't think he'll risk the performance of the team on the basis of sentiment. I mean, he was part of the reason, Farke, why Adam Forshaw didn't re-sign in the summer. Forshaw and the club had discussed a contract on reduced terms, and it wasn't that Farke didn't want him, but Farke's perspective was, I need to see him train before, I need to see how he copes with the intensity of the sessions before I commit to him, before I take him on. Forshaw, and I think quite understandably, saw it in the opposite point of view, which was I can't really risk getting injured if I don't have a contract when there are other clubs who want to take me on. So Forshaw ended up going to Norwich City. And I think you can apply the same to Sam Byram. If Byram had come in and he'd struggled and he hadn't been fit and he'd found it a challenge to get through the summer, I really don't think Farke would have signed him. I don't think Leeds would have tried to have taken him on. They would have gone their separate ways. So it's a challenge of management, but I think what you saw last night was basically the right way to handle it.
Yeah, and you get the sense that the same applies, I guess, for all what you might term like the legacy players, the previous promotion players, Cooper as well. No sign of an extension for him as he's coming up to his testimonial. So it feels like that era is perhaps by design coming to a close. Yeah,
well, I think at the moment, from what I can understand, Cooper doesn't know one way or the other whether he's going to get an extension. Dallas, I think, will be clever enough to realise that having been out for so long, Leeds are not on a whim just going to say, have a new deal. There's going to have to be some element of prove yourself there, which seems fair enough. And Ayling also out of contract at the end of this season. You could probably say, actually, Leeds have always been massively wedded to this group, or certainly the previous regime were. This was like the leadership group who kind of spoke for the dressing room and who would be engaged if there were discussions about, as an example, their wage deduction during COVID. They would speak to the senior leadership group who would kind of speak for the other players, and that's how it would get sorted out. I think from a performance point of view, you could maybe argue that the club have perhaps tried to persist with that promotion squad longer than they should have done. Although I don't think that means that there's no value or worth in having those players. It's just a case of how much do you rely on them. And I think in the circumstances, if you're being totally fair, there are probably other players who can play it right back who I understand why Farke would lean on more than Ayling at the moment. But I still think having Ayling in the background as he is will not be a bad thing. And he might come back into the team at some point.
There's a financial imperative there as well, isn't there? Whether we stay down or go up, they're going to be on relatively big wages because you get that adjustment for the Premier League, the renewal of the contracts at Premier League level. You drop down, still going to be fairly hefty wages, but hefty wages for players who are increasingly peripheral. Like Patrick Bamford, I guess, falls into the same category now, doesn't it? Because it feels like he is very much on the margins.
No, knowing Ayling as I do, I don't think he'll resent the fact that Farke is doing this. I think he may do, but I think you'll probably understand the reasoning for it. I think what will be tough, and this kind of applies to athletes in every single sport, professionally, it's the realisation, isn't it, that you're not what you once were, or that your standing isn't, I don't mean standing as in reputation, your standing as a player isn't quite what it was previously, and that to a large degree that's never coming back because, age
Time,
is what it is. And that's how it goes. So that must be quite difficult to take. But I sort of feel with Ayling that irrespective of how much more he plays, whether his contract gets extended, whether we really see a big impact from him again, it doesn't matter in terms of his reputation here, does it? I think his reputation is absolutely solid and concrete.
He'll always be welcome back as a hero, always.
And like if you're Farke saying Sam Byram is one of the best free transfers Leeds have ever had, and that probably does actually stand up to scrutiny, then I think Luke Ayling is probably the best 200 grand they've spent, give or take.
The dream end for Ayling is 4th of May. We're already promoted. We get to bring him off the bench. Not a dry eye in the house.
Yeah.
He can lift the trophy, maybe. Who knows? Who knows how we go up?
Oh,
but it's definitely happening.
Well, you do get a trophy for second place, don't you? Now in the EFL, you do, yeah. Because they said, well, if you win the league, you get the proper EFL Championship trophy. Yeah, there's a trophy for winning the playoffs at Wembley, so you get to go up the steps and get your medal and wave it at the fans. What about the second place team? That's not fair, is it? Probably Sean Harvey's idea.
Fair enough. He deserves it. He deserves it.
Only if Leeds were second. Yeah,
but they'll change that rule now, Phil. We know what they're like down at EFL headquarters.
But yeah, he deserves a good end, doesn't he?
He does. And also, there's just a bit of personality there, isn't there? And I like personality in football. You see it with the goals he scores, which don't go in very often, but every time they have, they've been quite special. And as I say, it seems to matter a lot to him, which is good.
And this stuff matters. I was saying on the weekly show, talking about Venables and how I feel about Euro 96, and at the root of that was a genuine human connection and a feeling of connection to that, to that team and that era, and being 18 years old at that time. Same with Luke Ayling. There's just it's provided a real connection. He's like a conduit through which I kind of personalised the whole Bielsa era. When if you look past Bielsa himself to his players, he's one of the players right at the cornerstone of that.
Yeah, totally trusted by Bielsa, totally trusted by the board as well, and that was the core of the dressing room that they really needed. You know, that was a big reason, I think, why they got promoted. And I cannot abide this thing that you see on Twitter quite regularly of not good enough anymore, get rid. You know, that does, you know, in a sort of broad sense, that is how it is eventually with every single player, but it doesn't need to be handled like that. And you remember as well that when Hernandez started to go over the hill at Leeds, his relationship with Bielsa became a bit strained, you know, which was I guess, one of the regrets of that era. And I think I certainly got the impression from Farke last night that he'd 100% want to avoid a scenario where he upset Ayling unfairly by leaving him out. But I think the reason he answered at length last night is because there's no getting away from the fact that if all your players are fit and available and you have a squad to pick and that's the 20 that you pick, you're setting the pecking order, aren't you?
Well, with that in mind, we turn our attention to Middlesbrough at the weekend, and fingers crossed, we are recording this ahead of the press conference. There are no new injury concerns, so we're likely to see a similar sort of lineup again, one would imagine. And you felt like towards the back end of the Swansea game, they were perhaps managing a few minutes for some of the players there, Byram being the obvious one.
Yeah.
When it came to that sub. The Sam Greenwood derby at the weekend, although he's not going to feature.
Minus Sam Greenwood, yeah.
Maybe he could come onto the pitch at half time.
Has he had a haircut?
Yeah. He's got a remarkable hairline as Sam Greenwood, hasn't he? It's very straight fringe, but not that either of you two.
Yeah, I was going to say let's not start throwing stones.
Should I grow a fringe?
I think you should.
Okay, I'll give it a go.
So just show up one day with a fringe painted on.
It would have to come from miles back in your hair, like going all the way over the front,
painted on Lego hair. Middlesbrough, I was just going to say, so they've had a bizarre season in the sense that it was like no wins in the first 7 with 5 defeats in the mix there. They then went and got 6 on the bounce, and then in the last 5 games, it's been more of a mixed bag. They've kind of been more of an average upper mid-table championship team, which is where they find themselves, the 10th on 27 points, so a little bit behind us now when it looked like they were properly closing in on us at one point.
Yeah, definitely got a chance at the playoffs. I think I've probably referenced this before, but I know a couple of people up at Middlesbrough, and when it was going wrong for them in the early weeks of the season, they were saying this will come good. You know, once decent results start to develop, there'll be a flow of them, and there was. And I think it was something. Carrick's clearly got something about him. I don't think he'd kind of lose control of things that quickly because they were good last season. But they had Akpom last season who scored and left, difficult to replace. This feels and looks like a tough game. This could be tight. This could be very competitive. This could be one of the better games that we've seen at Elland Road this season, I think.
Yeah, definitely. But it's another opportunity to lay down a marker, isn't it? Yeah. If you go out there and dominate this game, get in front. And we've not seen many teams that when we are on form, as you said about catching us on an off day before, Michael, like get us on an on day, and we're fairly irrepressible, aren't we, as a team? So I just hope that we get more of that.
Well, Duff last night was almost given the impression that had they got anything out of that game, they'd have been happy and content. He was referencing, the sort of superior Premier League, as he put it, ability that Leeds have. He was saying he reckoned Elland Road was probably as difficult place as anywhere to play this season. Middlesbrough and Carrick, I suspect, will be far more in two minds about what to do at the weekend, whether or not to come and be really aggressive and really positive, or whether to hedge the bet slightly. And I honestly think either tactic is totally legitimate at Elland Road, and either tactic could work if you get it right. But Boro have a big following. They'll be sold out, I'm sure. They are in the running for the top 6, so it's not as if they're one of the sides, in the way that maybe Plymouth and Swansea that can come to Leeds, be a bit kind of supine and get away with it from the point of view of their own fan base. I think people will want to see them come and have a crack, which is why I think it'll be a good contest.
Some strange results in there. It's some proper sawtooth form up and down. Like winning 4-0 at Sunderland was a hell of a big day and a big result there, wasn't it? But then there's like a 3-3 at Plymouth, and they've beat Preston 4-0. It's hard to know what to expect from them. So I guess we just need to hope that Leeds are on their game on the day. At home, against anyone with the players we've got, we should win. Yeah, is the truth of it this season. We need to just aim to win every home game. I don't think there's any. After a few years being in the Premier League and looking down the fixtures and going, well, nothing from that one.
probably try and win that one.
got all this to look forward to if Leeds go up again.
It's true. Like we've no excuses for not just winning home games against everyone, because we've got by far the best attack in the division, as far as I'm concerned. So let's just go and do that.
Yeah, one to watch for the Boro game then, Phil? Anything in particular to keep an eye on, you think? We've got to do one for Swansea, which was my bad.
Who should we have done for Swansea?
Can you start messaging him on 20 minutes, by the way?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know. I wish I'd never committed to that.
I don't think you ever did, to
I always
be honest.
forget. Somebody was asking us not to tweet, and apart from goals yesterday. I thought I might take that seriously and actually not bother. But yeah, I will try and do the 20-minute text. Yeah, WhatsApp, whatever. Who would we have done?
3 rings when you get in as well.
Yeah, that's right. We'd have done Dan James or Pirro on Wednesday night, wouldn't we? Both of whom had pretty good nights.
You say that with hindsight,
yes,
Phil.
And celebrated with a bit of laldy, didn't they? Especially Pirro.
I did see a couple of Swansea Twitter accounts being annoyed at that. Was there a little bit of a badge kiss in there?
Somebody said there was. I couldn't see from where I was sitting whether he kissed the badge. He did a phone, Eddie Nketiah style.
Well, he always does his phone, does Joel Pirro.
Yeah.
That's his thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Who was first, though? Him or Eddie?
Joel.
Right, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure about the badge. Irrespective of the badge, it was a fairly buoyant celebration. Then again, I don't know that I'm big for the players don't celebrate against the former club thing. I don't know if I can be bothered with it, really.
Yeah,
You're supposed
particularly
to have fun, aren't you? And
particularly for someone like Pirro, he's only ever passing through somewhere like that, isn't he? It's not like he was come through the youth system and was grew up watching them from the terraces and all this sort of stuff. He's just a footballer turned up, which, truthfully, as he is at Leeds, it's just a footballer we're borrowing for a bit, and at some point he'll leave.
Yeah, but don't say that, because I have fallen in love with Jorginho Ruta.
Yeah, he's different. He's going to stay.
Yeah,
he's going to stay. He's got more story.
Yeah, it was the every good thought memory of those two has been erased. Those two being Dan James and Joel Pirro. It says especially Joel Pirro, and there are 2 rat emojis next to it. Can you believe it? Wow.
Hello, Twitter. Anyway, one to watch at the weekend. It's got to be Spence, isn't it? When are we going to see Spence?
Against his former club as well?
Well, yes. At what point? Against a club who didn't make anything like as much of him as Forest did, the Championship. Forest was where Spence looked like the best right back in the division. But Middlesbrough did do quite nicely out of the money that Spurs paid for him. At some point, he's going to get unleashed, isn't he, if he stays fit? But when and what would be the right time to pull Archie Gray out of that role? And to let Spence loose. Is this the one? Is this the game?
Again, football loves narratives like this, doesn't it? So why not?
I'm thinking of the potential to see Johnny Howson and Archie Gray on the same pitch as well for Leeds.
No, that's a nice idea.
And plus Leeds legend Lewis O'Brien could feature as well.
Yes. 35 now is Howson.
Right.
That make you feel old?
Yeah. Next thing you'll be telling me James Milner's nearly 40.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everything about football makes me feel old, really. Yeah.
Well, we'll wrap it up there then. We'll catch up on Monday, you and I, and we'll see how it went. So enjoy the game.
Thank you.
Let's enjoy another 3 points. Fingers crossed. We'll see you soon.
The Square Ball Podcast.